Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. As our society becomes more and more technologically advanced, it will need people who can understand how to repair that technology. More and more students are attempting to enter STEM fields, which, as you are all likely aware, stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. The problem is that as hard as they may try to enter these fields, STEM is still a vastly underrepresented area when it comes to women and people of color. New York State, like many other states, has tried to fix this problem. Under the Science and Technology Entry Program, or S.T.E.M, opportunities are provided for disadvantaged students to be prepared to enter the STEM fields. Sounds good, right? Well, maybe not. According to the Pacific Legal Foundation and Legal Insurrection Foundation, who filed a federal lawsuit against the New York State Education Department, S.T.E.M includes a racial bias, specifically against anyone not of Black, Hispanic, Native American, or Alaskan Native origin. There are several plaintiffs involved in this lawsuit, and today we welcome to the classroom the lead attorney for the plaintiffs, Erin Wilcox, and Wai Wah Chin, charter president of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, Greater New York. Ladies, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Before we actually get into the meat of everything, can either of you or both of you please briefly explain to our listeners what is really at stake in this particular lawsuit?
Kevin, what's at stake in this lawsuit is the idea that kids and everyone, but here in this lawsuit, it's 7th through 12th graders, should have access to state-funded programs equally. And when I say equally, I mean that not based on their race, but based on race-neutral factors, based on their talents, based on their skills. And it's really just as simple as that in this lawsuit.
It sounds like it's quite simple, but I know that, as was mentioned, that S.T.E.M was originally designed at least to support those students, as I mentioned, those students who are historically underrepresented in those STEM fields. So isn't STEM satisfying that mission at least?
You've got to really think about that mission and whether that's actually okay. And it sounds like a good program. I know it really does. It sounds great. Like we're helping kids access health and science technology careers. But what this program is really doing is it's saying that only kids of certain races get to access these careers. It does kind of masquerade as a program for low-income kids. And if that's all it was, we would have no problem. I don't think any of us would be here because, that there are low-income kids of every race. That is totally a worthy goal, and low-income kids do need help getting to these careers in STEM. But that's not what this program does. What this program does is it says that kids of certain races are automatically eligible to apply to STEP, which, by the way, is a really cool program. It's got some amazing opportunities in some really great schools across the state. But what it also does is say, hey, kids of other races, and particularly Asian and white kids, you've got to meet some extra hurdles. You have to be low income, whereas kids of the 4 races that you named, you guys are automatically eligible, even if your parents are billionaires. And when you kind of put that example next to each other, like a Black child of billionaires is automatically eligible for this program, whereas a Chinese American child whose parents are just barely above the poverty line, they're not. That kind of highlights how this program's requirements really don't make any sense. And race should not be the deciding factor here.
I just want to push back just a little bit here, and because I think that especially when we talk about the STEM fields, traditionally Asians and whites have been fairly represented in those fields. So again, when you talk about the underrepresentation that STEP is trying to address, that seems to be the case here. I totally hear you when you say that, you may have the rich Black kid or family whose kid wants to go into a STEP program, he's automatically enrolled or accepted. But is that really the case? Does that really happen? Are there a lot of instances where something like that is going to happen? Enough instances that would call for this type of a lawsuit saying that STEP is racially unfair?
Kevin, I'd like to interject over
Please do.
here. I'm trying to understand when you say overrepresented and underrepresented. I think it's really discriminating and biased to call somebody overrepresented.
Well, I think I said fairly represented. I didn't say overrepresented. I said fairly.
Well, it's actually representation is an odd term because when you get into a program, who are you representing? Are you representing anybody? Do you come into this program representing all the other Black kids or all the other Asian kids, all the white kids? When you get a job, do you represent the other ones? Are you going to share your income with the other ones? This whole notion of representation doesn't make sense. Now, if you want to talk about proportionality, I can discuss that. But to talk about people being overrepresented or underrepresented, just by saying underrepresented, it implies that other groups are overrepresented, which I think is a slur to any other group. So we should talk about it and say, all right, they may not be proportional. And let's think about what are the issues here that drive that. If there are disproportionate numbers of people in any field, we might think about, are there real barriers or are there created barriers? Or what are the issues there? If we're saying that kids in some areas, some neighborhoods are not given the proper kind of training in the K to 12, K to 8, K to 12 education. And I'll tell you that there are schools in New York City where not a single 8th grader knows how to do fractions. Think about that a second. That's something that a 3rd grader should learn how to do. And when not a single kid, and yes, that is not a school where it is predominantly Asian. It is unthinkable in some ways to say that no 8th grader can do fractions. Well, I think we have a different problem. It is not a problem of representation or proportionality. It is a problem that these kids are not getting educated in basic math skills that are critical to any STEM program.
And you are absolutely right on that point. And as an educator myself, I was in the K to 12 system for a long time. I've seen that. You're absolutely right about that part. And with the pandemic and the academic slide and all of that, we definitely have seen that. We know that to be a fact. But that's not what we're talking about here. I mean, if you're right, if we want to have that conversation, we can have that conversation about how the allocation of resources is not proportional. And you have some.
Actually, I would stop and say that in New York City, at the very least, the better schools actually get less funding than the worse schools.
But no, but we're not talking about just funding.
Okay,
I get that as well. But you also get you're right. I understand that because the better you do, and it's unfortunate that this happens this way. But yeah, the better the school performs, then, and I've argued about this all the time that there's money in failure. The worse a school does, the more money they get. But until they start to do better, then that money is taken away from them. And that's the stark irony that we're talking about here in education. But again, that's not the conversation that we're having here today. I think right now we're really talking about
representation.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So going back to representation, I would first say that this whole notion of representation is one that we have to question at the very core, because we are trying to deal with individuals. We're dealing with individual students, and we have to treat each individual student on that same basis of not discriminating against them by their race.
Ms. Wilcox, I know you were trying to jump in before we went off on our own little diatribe here, but what would you like to add to that?
Oh, no. I mean, Wai Wah is so experienced in dealing with these issues. But I can only give a legal gloss to it. Yep. And I think it's important for us to remember in these conversations that what these programs are doing are treating people differently because of their race. And that is legally a really significant thing in our country. There are that is such a big deal to treat people differently because of something they can't control, like their race, that it can only be done in really, really specific circumstances, or it's only supposed to be done in really specific circumstances. And in the education sector, that's almost never. And so to have a program like this, you can debate the merits of it or not, but the fact is that dividing people up and treating them differently based on their race should basically never be on the table in education. And to have a program like this that has gone on for almost 40 years, that is almost older than I am, and no one has said anything, no one has checked it, no one has been like, hey, hold on, is this legal? Is this morally right? Like, what are we doing here? Is really just astounding to me. And this should not be happening in the year 2024. It really shouldn't.
I agree completely with Erin here. Representation and race, you're trying to use collective judgment here. And collective judgment should be innately, frankly, offensive. This is a collective judgment that we're imposing on our kids. Think about it. When we can tell a kid that because of your race, you're going to be rewarded or punished because of that, we should find that immoral. It's morally abhorrent.
In that particular statement, you're absolutely right. I do agree with that. But I want to liken this argument to the specialized high schools, because you're in New York City as well, Wai Wah, so you probably understand where I'm coming from with this. With all the specialized high schools that we have in New York City, and how with certain schools, there's a higher white and Asian population in some schools than you have minority populations, and because of the exams that people have to take to get into them. So is that kind of on the same plane here? Because you have this disproportionality of students of one ethnicity or a couple of ethnicities in some of the schools as opposed to others. So when New York City was trying to find a way to kind of level that playing field so that you can have more of a balance, there was a lot of pushback against that. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to level the playing field again for all students, but we're creating this pushback once again. So am I just talking apples and oranges here, or maybe it's oranges and tangerines?
No, not at all. They're all fruits and nuts, right? But in truth, over here, we're talking about, when you say level the playing field, it sounds really good, but you're not doing it that way, because you do not level the playing field by saying that, oh, we just want a certain outcome. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for an outcome of optics of melanin. And that's not really how people should be judged, especially for an educational program. We're talking about academics and their different goals. And of course, ultimately, we have to think about what is driving this. This is the soft bigotry of low expectations for a lot of the kids. Think about how you are addressing that, making this collective problem. It's a collective judgment. It becomes a collective problem. And when there is no such thing, can you think of something more level than a race-blind test, actually? This is a test when you talk about the specialized high schools, where they don't look at your race, they don't look at your gender, they don't look at where you live, what your parents do, rich, poor. I think that that's the way you should be thinking about it. Can you take an academic test that is objective for what you need to do? It's not as if they were testing them in Russian, okay? They don't test them in Chinese math or Bangladeshi math or anything like that. They are teaching them on basic things that you need to have to perform well in school. And so if there is a problem, the problem should not be one of trying to say, let's take the easy way. Let's not bother to teach the kids better and prepare them. We are going to just say that we're going to change the program so we have an outcome of melanin in the proportions that we want. Why is that good for the individual who may not be prepared? And they haven't learned anything more. They just happen to take a seat, okay? That doesn't make them better. It makes the school worse, because all of a sudden you have to dumb down a lot of classes, and that has happened. in many of these schools that we're talking about, whenever they try to go and jigger around with these programs that produce a melanin outcome, they have to start dumbing down the classes. And you see that from even Harvard, where they have a dopey math course for beginning math, where it's going to be for Harvard. Really? You're teaching high school math? But of course, they have also the most difficult math course in the country. But you're not really preparing the kids. You're just telling them that we're going to designate you prepared. So how is that good for the individual, for the school, and for society? Because we're not producing the best people, the ones who are the best challenged, best able, best desirous of doing that kind of work. It is not by accident that the specialized high schools have generated 15 Nobel Prize winners in STEM. Okay, that's more than many countries have.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that by having a race blind test. If we start doing it just by, let's go and have your melanin content determinant, you will give a pass to all the programs that are not properly preparing kids. Just consider again that there are schools where not a single third grader, not a third grader, an eighth grader can do a third grade math. That is pretty outrageous.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guests today are attorney from the Pacific Legal Foundation, Erin Wilcox, and Wai Wah Chin, charter president of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, Greater New York. Again, you haven't said anything, I'm sure you noticed, you haven't said anything that is false or not factual, and I actually agree with a lot of the stuff the things that you are saying, because I think just the educational system itself needs to be overhauled. There has to be something done to be able to create more of a balance that we are trying to create. And yeah, giving people a simple pass is probably not the way to do it, because now you're creating problems in other areas, not just in education here or in a particular program. Now you're creating problems of, well, if I got by here, maybe I can get by at work. Maybe I can get by in my relationship. Maybe I can get by someplace else. And they don't put in the work, and they feel that they don't have to put in the work to be able to actually earn the privilege, as opposed to thinking it's an expectation. And I think that's where the bigger issue is, again, that we're not equipped to solve today, but that's what we're really getting at. Although one thing that I do take a little bit of umbrage to is the notion of courses being dumbed down because of the students of higher melanin content in their classes. That makes it sound, again, I'm not saying that you said that you're saying this, but it makes it sound as if because of those who have a higher melanin content now are not capable. And again, I'm not saying that you're saying this, but that's what the implication of that statement is. But
isn't that what exactly you want to do? If you're saying that you want to have a set aside for a group, you're saying it, not me. I'm willing to say we can do this without racial identity, okay? Because if we are going to have that kind of program, we can either do it that way, but I am not going to say that there are certain groups who cannot make it except for that. I'm not the one who's being biased. I think that the ones who are trying to push and say that, we can't teach these kids, so let's go and have our special set-asides for them. I don't hold them to that kind of low expectations. And I will also say that in the specialized high schools for 20 consecutive years, of the top three, the bottom third, Brooklyn Tech, had for 20 straight years a majority Black and Hispanic enrollment. Okay? But I will tell you that it was because what they had was special programs, the gifted and talented programs, a lot of screening beforehand, a lot of training, okay, that happened earlier. And then when they took away those programs, that's what happened. I will also say that we should think about how do we address the issue that Asians spend twice as much time studying than whites and 4 times as much hours as Blacks. Now, do you think that a kid who is spending of any color, it doesn't, in this case, it just happens to be Asian, but if a kid is spending 4 times as much of their free time studying versus another, do you not expect that child to perform better? It is nearly like saying, well, the person who is short and never tries to dribble a ball can get into the NBA. And I will also have to say, as I said, we have to push back and think about individuals and their achievements, whether we are going to say that, well, we should do everything by proportionality. What is wrong with the NBA being mostly Black? I don't think there's a problem. There is no problem. And they use taxpayer funding in all of their arenas. There is no problem. And on the average, I don't know how many millions of dollars these NBA players make, but it's around 10 million. That's pretty good, much better than a STEM scientist, in fact. So I want to put that into perspective and say that we shouldn't think of proportionality. 90% of all the nurses in the country are female. Do we want to say, let's have a set aside of about 50-50 because then we get proportional? Are people worse off by getting treated by female nurses and no male nurses? Oh, I don't think so. In fact, no. I think in most cases, people would rather have a female nurse, actually. And likewise, how many female lumberjacks are there? I think that is another one of the most dangerous industries, in fact. It's like 99 point whatever % male. We should not have a problem unless it is something that is done in a biased manner. If the selection is done in a biased manner, then we should stop it. But if it is done for that industry, for the purpose of the job, for the purpose of the school, that's another matter. So this whole notion of proportionality, I think that people should think about it again and say, why are we doing this? Are we thinking about the individual? Or are we thinking about this notion that everything in the world should be by a certain proportion? If you have kids, if you know any family, if you have several kids, even in the same nature and nurture environment, okay, with the same nurturing and nurturing, how is it that kids will turn out so differently? And you do not pull back one because they are going further. You don't say, hey, you kid, you can't do so much because your younger brother's not doing as well. So, okay, we're going to dumb down everything that you get to do. And you take the other kid and say, so sorry, everybody in this family is a doctor. You got to be a doctor even though you really want to play your cello. No, you don't do that. You have to go and look at what are the individual strengths of that child. And they're from the same parents, same household. Mm-hmm. Why can we not? If we believe in diversity, if we believe in individuals doing things that are best to their abilities and their interest and their commitment, don't we think that we should do that as opposed to say that we have to do things by proportion?
Well, again, and I do agree that we need to stop trying to take the quote unquote easy way out of a problem, because again, this problem is much bigger and more complex than we're trying to make it out to be, or that it has been made out to be. And so by doing something, I guess there's what's the old saying that the road to hell is wide, is paved with good intentions. So I think that's what has been going on here, that New York State had, and I'm sure other states as well, have had the good intentions of being able to get more people to be able to enter the STEM fields. But their process of going about doing it is what's causing the ire of a lot of other people. Because I do agree with you. You put in the work, you should get the opportunity. If that's what it should be based on. You put in the work, you get the opportunity. And unfortunately, though, we see that a whole generation of people put in the work, but they were never granted that opportunity. And so now, again, you're trying to correct a wrong that was done to these people years ago, and now it's impacting another group of people that you really didn't intend. You have these unintended consequences now. And I think that's what we're really trying to address, or trying to avoid, to make sure that it doesn't happen. But I don't know how we fix it.
Well, I think that we have to first question, what is the problem? Before we start creating solutions for non-existent problems, we have to see what is the real problem, okay? But I think that if you are talking about just getting more people into a program, expand the program. Expand the program, but do not discriminate. The thought is, do not discriminate. Whether you have a big program or a small program, it should not discriminate against any individual based on their race or gender. I should say sex. I don't want to get into that whole discussion.
Yeah, I guess that's a whole other conversation that we're not prepared to get into this afternoon or this evening.
Yeah, I think that meritocracy is the biggest issue over here. If we believe in that, that is something that has to do with the individual. And I'm sorry, Erin, yours.
No, absolutely. I think with the STEP program, it's important to remember too that we don't really know what exact harm they were trying to solve 40 years ago. The generic stated purpose is just to involve more underrepresented minorities in STEM and healthcare related professions. But again, this is a program that treats people differently just because of their skin color. So to hit that high bar of discriminating against people, because that's what it is, discrimination based on their skin color, you need to be able to tie the reason for that different treatment pretty tightly to the different treatment. And the state of New York can't do that. It's not doing that. There's nothing in its record back in the mid 80s when they were debating and deciding whether to do this. It wasn't, that minorities had been barred from healthcare fields recently. It wasn't that the kids were getting thrown out of medical school or anything like that. This is just a general, let's have more diversity. Maybe if you take a 7th grader and give them this summer program, maybe in 10 years, they will then decide to become a doctor. And that is just too tenuous of a link to do something as absolutely terrifying, quite frankly, as treating someone differently because of their skin color. It's just not good enough. And, that's not always the case in every case, but certainly in the case of STEP, that link is not nowhere near close enough, certainly not to stand up to judicial scrutiny, but it shouldn't even pass the sniff test, honestly.
And I think we can go on with this conversation for another hour or so, but unfortunately our time is up for today. So I would definitely like to thank our guests, attorney from the Pacific Legal Foundation, Erin Wilcox, and Wai Wah Chin, charter president of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, Greater New York, for a very, very lively and interesting conversation today.
Thank you so much.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.